Just to explain, I didn't record any footage of Super Metroid, and besides, Nintendo have a history of heavy-handedness on YouTube. They don't really accept that fair use is a thing, and Google is apparently quite content not to challenge them on that. So I'm going to be talking about Super Metroid over this royalty-free stock footage of some Jellyfish. Super Metroid is a game that I found really compelling at the start. I just kept picking the thing back up again, was playing a lot more than I really have played any of the other 12 and 12s. But towards the end really started to lose motivation on and didn't pick it up for a few days at a time. As a result, despite the fact that this is one of the shorter games on the list, it actually took me 5 weeks from start to finish, and I think that's for a few different reasons that I want to get into. I played the SNES version of this game emulated on a PSP Go, which I thought was going to be a good idea for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I could make use of emulator save states to get through some of the tricky rooms without having to do a lot of backtracking. I could save anywhere I wanted to. I know this makes it kind of easy compared to the original game, but I honestly don't think that I would have got through this game if I had to play with the constraints of the original. And the other reason that I played on this device was so that, unlike the previous 2 games in the 12 and 12, I could play this one anywhere, and indeed I did play through a fairly significant chunk of the game in bed. But there was one unanticipated downside of playing on the PSP, and that was the ergonomics of the controls. I found it a little uncomfortable to play for a prolonged period, so as a result most of my play sessions were less than an hour. Worse than that, some of the control combinations that I needed to use were very difficult to hit on that controller. There were a couple of boss fights where I had to hold down one of the trigger buttons to aim at 45 degrees, hold down the fire button to do a charge shot, and keep pushing jump. And something about the ergonomics of that combination of controls on a PSP was extremely uncomfortable, and in fact, during 1 or 2 of the boss fights, while I was trying to hit all those buttons, I repeatedly, inadvertently switched off the power to the unit with my palm well into the fight. You can imagine how frustrating that is when it happens like half a dozen times in a row. So in retrospect, I thought it was going to be a really good SNES emulation platform, but in this case, probably not the best device I could have chosen. At the start of the game, I had the idea that if I needed help, rather than just searching the internet, I would try and find the solution to whatever I was stuck on in contemporary issues of Nintendo Power magazine. I downloaded them all off the Internet Archive months ago, and I thought that it would be fun to try to get through any places where I was stuck in the way that someone would have had to when the game came out. They could not search GameFAQs for a walkthrough, they just had to hope that a magazine would come along and print the solution to their problem. So I did this a couple of times in the first half of the game, and it worked. I was amazed. I actually did find the solution to my problem without going to the internet. I found it in the pages of an old Nintendo Power from 1988 or something. I was very happy with that. I didn't actually stick with that because there came a point I was stuck. I was sitting in bed and I didn't want to get out of bed and turn the computer on and look at my PDFs. So I ended up just Googling it on my phone. I didn't really stick with that experiment, but it was a fun thing to do. I would do it again. I enjoyed the game, but my biggest criticism with it, which might say more about me as a player who wasn't really paying enough attention, was I thought it was really too light on signposting. There were 3 or 4 occasions where I got through a section, found a power-up, and then had no idea where to take that power-up, what had just been unlocked, what the next section I had access to was, and involved a lot of backtracking and just sort of trial and error exploration to try and find things when I didn't just go straight to a walkthrough for help. Now I think this is probably only a problem for a first-time player. This game is frequently said to be the best of the Metroid games and one of the best games of all time, and that may well be the case for the player who knows exactly what they're doing. But I think as a first-time player who hadn't kept any notes, and maybe that was my problem, having to sort of brute force navigation by backtracking all the places I'd already been looking for doors that were now open, I spent a lot of the playthrough doing that, probably an hour and a half at least, and it was really not a fun part of the game. Like I said, I get why this game is so highly regarded, I see why its design is so lauded, but I just could have done with an objective marker on the minimap. I know the later games have that. You know, I see the merit of a lack of handholding in a game, but I really keenly felt the absence of any guidance, at least there wasn't any that I noticed. Anyway, like I said earlier, this game took me over a month. I started March 20th, finished it April 26th. partially because I didn't play for very long at the time, partially because I kind of lost motivation, and partly because I was also playing Danganronpa at the time. But that's put me into the month of May having completed only 3 games. I should have done 4 by now. I'm just going to carry on and we'll see, but just to be clear, playing all 12 of these missed classic games is way more important to me than finishing by a certain date. It is quite possible, maybe even probable, that I will have only finished 10 or 11 by the end of the year, and that is absolutely fine. If that's the case, I'll just continue into 2018. So anyway, that's Super Metroid down, the 3rd game. Next up is PlayStation Classic Shadow of the Colossus, which is already shaping up to be a much more psychotherapeutic game than I expected. I'm Chris, thanks for watching.